Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. This is Joe Saponari of SciMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. For the freshest content, a peek behind the scenes, and more candid conversation about running our businesses, dealing with clients, fixing tough technical issues, and everything else you love about Command Control Power, we invite you to join us on Patreon so you don't miss any of this great content. Go to commandcontrolpower.com and click support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the patron-only shows right in your favorite podcast app. Once again, to join us on Patreon and get the latest patron-only episodes, visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support. We hope to see you there, and thanks for listening. Command Control Power is brought to you commercial-free thanks to the support of our community. Our VIP supporters include Jason Detbarn of Adigy.com, John Brown of GroveTech.co, Watchman Monitoring, and Adam Angst of Tidbits Content Network. Thanks very much for supporting the show.
So how do you like when you're in Apple Mail in Ventura, right? And you delete a message or you archive a message and it doesn't go away? Have you seen this one? And you have to open up.
Oh, yeah.
If you do tabbed mail, which I do now, I'll do the keystroke and open up a new window to see all my mail. If I open up a new window, mail has gone away. But if I keep the original window that I told it to archive or delete, the mail still sits there.
Wow. Why is it so hard for them? I feel like mail, they're always just like squashing bugs in mail, like constantly.
I got my own complaints about mail, but I don't want to hijack your story. But I have definitely seen that.
Okay, so here's my story. It had nothing to do with mail. So I mentioned this to Joe last week, or the week before last, and I didn't really think it was a thing, and I thought it was maybe an edge case, and maybe I pushed the wrong button, because I use Adigy, and I got this big Gete console in front of me, and I'm like one of the passengers trying to land it all the time. So much you can do with Adigy, and I'm just a piker. I'm not like a pro, like Joe's an Adigy pro.
Wow.
Sam, you're a
ace.
Jamf pro. But I'm just one of the passengers trying to land the plane because the pilot's passed out. You know what I mean? So I got 2 unrelated random calls, people on Ventura. In those 2 cases, they were both on 13.2.1, and they reach out to me and they say, all I can see is a black screen, but I could see my cursor. My cursor outline is white, but I can do a hard shutdown, reboot, and this is all I see. And so one of my clients, Apple took them through all the troubleshooting steps, which granted, speaking to Apple support frontline, so it wasn't escalated probably to a second-tier engineer. So they had them do the typical things that you would have them do. Safe boot, boot off the recovery partition, repair it if it needed repair. Oh, that's another thing too. In Disk Utility in Ventura, you can select the top level of the hard drive and you can run a repair on it, and it does it really quick. But then if you, obviously they segment out the data from the actual OS. If you select the data, tree it out, and you say repair, have you seen this where you just get a spinning beach ball for minutes and minutes and sometimes it never really finishes the repair? Have you seen this one?
I haven't had to use Disk Utility to repair a drive in quite a while.
Okay.
But I've seen it take...
Norton Disk Doctor.
Yeah, but just general troubleshooting steps.
Sure.
All right, so I digress. I'll move on. I was in front of a machine like that today, now having nothing to do with the ones that happened 2 weeks ago. Another client called, same deal. But this is the very first time I've actually sat in front of the Mac without the client around. So I had enough time to kind of like process things and do things systematically. So I did all the expected things, SMC reset, parameter RAM, swinging the dead cat over the computer a couple times. Nothing. Couldn't get it to budge. Every time it would reboot it in safe mode, nothing. It would just come back to that partially booted, and then it would go to black screen where you could see the white cursor. And I checked the machine in Adigy, and the machine is showing that it's offline. So it's not like it's online, but for whatever reason, you're just not getting the rendering on the screen. So the only thing I could do in all 3 cases, and this is what Apple advised my client, was to reinstall the operating system. non-destructive. And typically, in all my experience of reinstalling the operating system, you do that, everything comes back up, there's your user account, you log back in, you may have to re-authenticate with your Apple ID password, no fuss, no muss, everything's groovy. In all three cases, you cannot log into the user account until you create a brand new admin user. I create a temporary admin user, log into that, and then I log out of that temporary admin user, and then I'm at the login screen, and I could see the existing user home folder that we want to log into. I log in, all the applications, the custom applications are missing. What's missing? Okay, Backblaze is gone. It doesn't appear like Adigy's working anymore until I delete the profile and reinstall it. The profile's still there, but it doesn't appear like it's working. Adobe Creative Suite's gone. Microsoft 365's gone.
Wow.
It's just not in the applications folder. What the heck? What
Jerry,
the heck?
Is anything left, or is it just a complete, like, only system apps are there?
In the applications folder, it's only system apps.
Wow.
So no client downloaded apps are there. All the data's on the home screen. People save stuff to their desktop, and things are saved to the documents folder. And this particular client today was using iCloud, so we needed them there to do the final two-factor. So I couldn't get iCloud up and running. Even 1Password, the client uses 1Password, that was gone. And when I talked to Joe about this 2 weeks ago, I said, I don't want to mention this on the show. This might be just my own goofiness, trying to land a plane. Maybe I did something. But now I could tell you, completely disparate clients, the only thing that they have in common with each other is they're either M1s or M2s, so it's Apple Silicon. And I think they were at that previous version of Ventura, which was 13.2.1. And talk about losing time. It's a non-trivial thing now to do this, because you have to, as somebody I worked with years and years ago would walk up to some client's machine and goes, looks like I got to rebuild your machine. But literally, you have to rebuild the machine. You have to download all these apps again. What a pain in the neck. And I just wanted to put it out there. I've done some Google foo on it, and nothing consistent. Some people say, oh, safe boot, and I'm fine. So I don't think they're talking specifically about this issue. And just in the course of you guys and I just texting back and forth today, Joe brought up the point, could these three disparate clients maybe have been in the middle of the update? And you know how the progress bar just sits there and they're not patient enough, and then they do a hard reboot and maybe they killed it. So it's possible this happened. But this client today, she's more of a grandma, and I wouldn't see her doing a hard shutdown because it didn't come back up.
Yeah, that's always the guess, is did they do something, screw something up in the middle? Some of those updates also update whatever kind of firmware. I forget. It used to be that they would update the T2 chip or whatever, and there was like a second restart, and Apple would even warn that your Mac may restart up to 2 or 3 times or something like that. And also there's a step where like it goes black and it just like stays black for a while. It's updating
I've seen that,
the T2 chip or something. And at any of those points, like, that obviously with any update, you don't want to hard restart or shut down in the middle of it or just interfere in general. But there are some opportunities where it's more likely to happen and maybe more problematic if they did it at that time. But I would just as likely blame Apple's software update process because of how many problems it's had over the last few OS versions, really. Few major OS versions since Big Sur, and I can't keep track anymore. It used to be like in my head, it was coming from this version to this version. Sometimes there was an issue or whatever the known issue was with like software upgrades masquerading as updates to certain versions of 12.6. something. I just can't keep track of it anymore. So I don't know if there was something going from 13 to 1 that like some updates failed or whatever, because they've also had so many 0 days, things that are being actively exploited. So they just keep pushing these patches lately. And I don't know if they've ever addressed some of these underlying bugs in that process, but it occurs to me that when you first describe this, like applications are missing, it sounds really weird because in the old days, there was just one applications folder and all the Apple stuff lived there, and so did all the user installed applications. Now, I think there's some sort of bifurcation there where I guess the user applications get installed in a different place. Is that true? Like that they're on the data partition versus the system partition?
Yeah. Yeah, which is why it's interesting that whole chunk gets wiped, but the user data is still intact. So it's not,
Right.
it doesn't seem like the entire data partition gets wiped, just the applications. Can't even make heads or tails of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And the other crazy thing was if the person was using Foxfire or Chrome, all their bookmarks are gone. And you have to recover them either from Backblaze or from Time Machine.
What? So their data's there, but this is wackadoo, man.
That's so frustrating too, because then these are the obvious ones, but what am I missing? What is not obvious upon first boot where they notice it right away, or you notice it right away, where they're going to come back to you in a month and it's going to be, oh, I never noticed that these notes aren't here, or some other obscure app that had its data stored in some weird location. Because again, going back to the system partition versus the data partition, or container, volume, whatever, are there symlinks? Is that how that works? That's another thing I can't quite keep track of anymore, where APFS has the concept of the container and then the volumes that are in the container, the shared volume group, whatever, and how I didn't think that relied on symlinks between the two, but maybe it does, where there's a symlink for the applications that are on the data partition so that they show up in the applications folder. And maybe there's a separate symlink related to the user data. But then to your point, why then would some of the user data not be there, like the bookmarks? Just none of it really seems to make any sense logically across the board.
Yeah, I don't get this at all. Each time you give me an additional detail, I'm more and more confused as to what really happened here.
The other thing, too, is just the inconvenience of it, because these people are dead in the water. And if it's a business computer, they pay you their monthly fee. They're expecting you to respond, and you feel sympathetic or empathetic with them to a certain degree. And in every case, obviously, the client had to pay for my time, but it's just so inconvenient. I didn't want to deal with this today. I didn't want to take care of Nana's computer and sit in front of it. And this is, like I said, this is one of those people that I know is not pushing the envelope or trying to be some sort of a power user and be a smart person and try to finagle the OS in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of points there. First of all, that's the big fear with going to any kind of managed service in general, is that there's this expectation of priority support, which I'm fine to promise in general when it's just like the odd issue that crops up. That's what we're here for. When there's an update apocalypse situation like this, you start to worry, what if this affected 90% of your fleet or whatever? Like, that's a lot of nanas to deal with in one day, you know? And then besides that, and then there's what about all-in support? That's another big fear is, okay, I can promise all-in support when I can predict what that really means in practice. But if you have once a year, Apple's update thing goes sideways and it means I have to touch every computer, let alone dealing with something like this. It's not just a quick fix. It's like reinstalling, reconnecting after manually, and just fixing all these little issues. And then again, not to mention the follow-ups that may occur from there. So it's hard to predict what the fallout might be and what the time investment might be. And therefore, if you've promised all-in support for whatever that price is, as nice of a rate or monthly price as that might have been, it can easily turn your books upside down when suddenly this kind of thing happens, where it's by no fault of your own, by no fault of Apple's and of the clients, I should say. Let's say it's maybe Apple's fault. You're left holding the bag. It's rough. So
I see where you're going with this, Joe. Just another reason to not go with a new all-in plan. Okay.
I'm not backing out. But it does give me pause. But the other thing you mentioned, Jerry, they have in common Apple Silicon, obviously, which does introduce some new mechanisms under the hood, but also Adigy. And since you mentioned Adigy, right, I'm wondering, do they all have the same policy? Is there something in the policy that was trying to reinstall some outdated third-party component or some script that's not good anymore or whatever, that maybe there's something on the policy level that they have in common?
It seems like this is just a real edge case, but I've had 3 edge cases now. And I don't have a huge install base, but but you're right, Joe. That gives me pause as well, that they do have Adigy. Did you know, by the way, that remember in the old days when you'd open up About This Mac and you'd get that little window, and if you wanted more info in the system window, it would give you that large list, that laundry list of all the
system profiler.
System information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you know how to quickly get to that?
Yeah. Option key?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Does that still work? That was my question. I wasn't sure.
Oh, it does still work.
Oh, nice.
In Ventura. Okay. Yeah. I had no idea. So for the listeners at home, you simply hold down the Option key and you click on the Apple in the upper left-hand corner, and the words, instead of about this Mac, turn into system information, and then you get your old friend back there that lists all the capabilities of the computer. And that in Ventura, by the way, is the only way that you can see that you're in safe boot mode.
Wow.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, Jerry, actually, because a longtime listener of the show, Guillaume Gete, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He created a documentation called 80 Shades of the Option Key. I think you saw that he posted it in our channel, which is very cool to see like the history and current status of what the Option Key can do. And one of these days we got to play Option Jeopardy and see how many we actually know. But I found it interesting to see the history of that throughout time, the different operating system versions and what it can do per application. So I'll throw that in the show notes for anyone that wants to check it out.
Nice. Yeah, it's a good tip. Yeah, it's a weird issue because I do remember, speaking of this, like the wider spread concerns about updates and things, there was the update right around the 13.2 era, I think, where machines were rebooting into recovery, I think was the issue, right? But that's not what's happening here. So this is like a new variant on that. So I don't know, maybe we will hear from listeners about this 13.3.1 update. Maybe it's just going to 13.3.1 from 13.2.1, something like that. Yeah,
now,
it's dicey.
Being a simple caveman that I am, if they were on 13.2.1, was there some intermediary stepping stone that they should have gone to first before they went to the latest version of Ventura?
I don't think so, because I think Apple fixed it. Supposedly,
yeah, they certainly did.
You know,
the fix is in.
This is
the
real
good title.
This is the fix, exactly. You don't want to go to recovery. We can get you to a black screen. How about that? Does that work better for you? Because the issue there was something about whatever that update was at the time. And I remember because the notes from the update showed something about Macs enrolled in MDM software updates no longer boot to recovery in certain circumstances. It was something to that effect. But I also don't think that was the extent of the issue, because I'm pretty sure people were seeing that even if they didn't have MDM soft system updates. So I don't really know if that was really what the whole issue was, or if this is just another layer to that. We may get a 13.3.2 that fixes the black screen or whatever. I don't think we've even expressed just how frustrating it is, how unreliable something as fundamental as Apple software updates has become. It's just
a mess.
It's just a total mess, and it has been for like 3 major OS versions. Hence, like why we've developed nudge workflows to work around it, kickstarting of software updates, the right formula for kickstarting under the right circumstances. So my workflow for nudge now, I've got nudge deployed through Adigy. It took a lot of doing. I don't know that I can necessarily offer support for this or provide a tutorial, because it took so long to get this really dialed in the way I want it. It's several different things. So you have to deploy nudge. You have to deploy the nudge launch agent, and you have to deploy a nudge MDM configuration for nudge, or maybe you can do it with whatever the other method is. Sam, you might be doing through Jamf. Are you using the MDM configuration?
I'm using the configuration profile for it as well.
Okay. That seems to me like the thing that I'm most familiar with, but there's another, is it like JSON, I think is the other method of basically telling.
You can have custom profile with JSON data, sure.
And so that is what tells nudge which ones you want which versions to go to. So for example, you say, okay, if the machine is running any version of macOS 13, I need it to be running macOS 13.3.1 as of now, and I want it to be, the deadline is like whatever date. So you give people a couple weeks or a week or whatever to update. And there's other configuration options in there. And what do you want it to do when they need an update? So in my case, what I have it do is it launches my custom AppleScript, thanks to Ross Matsuda, who we've interviewed on the show about this, which is a AppleScript app that I also separately deploy to my nudge configuration, my nudge policies, which lives in the utilities folder. And it opens silently with no icon visible and all that. And all it does is it basically uses GUI scripting to tell the Apple update preference to open, to click the more info button, to show the other updates are available, to click the whatever update or install or whatever it is on that screen, to then click the agree on the license. So it like does all this stuff for the user. And in the cases where I guess they're running, I think it's for Apple Silicon devices, then they have to put in their administrator password to actually install the update. That's all they have to do after clicking update in the nudge window. So I've got that all pretty well dialed in. So when there's a new update, Then I have to update my nudge configuration profile, which I just recently had the opportunity to do at 30,000 feet from an airplane, which was exciting. So I updated my nudge configuration profile. And I also have the custom fact in Adigy configured to detect when software updates are not functioning properly, because sometimes Nudge knows that there's an update because I've told it if they're running 13, they need to be on 13.3.1. But Apple's software update doesn't yet detect 13.3.1 as an available update. So in those cases, they would click update and nudge, and it would bring them over to software update, and software update would be like, you're up to date. So, okay, This is annoying. So so you have to detect when software update is not detecting the right updates, and you have to then kickstart it. And there's like a certain, I don't know if it's in the community scripts or just in the Adigy channel on Slack, where you can get working kickstart command for the software updates. And so you have to update the custom fact so that you're telling your custom fact, if the machine is running macOS 13 and it's not running the latest, does it detect that as an available update? And if it doesn't detect the latest as an available update, then go ahead and kickstart software update. So you have to tell it what the latest is. If you're running 13 and you don't see macOS 13.3.1 is available, but you're not running macOS 13.3.1, so you have to tell it what the latest one is. So I have to update that custom script or custom fact. And then I have an additional custom script for manually pushing that out to clients, which opens my AppleScript behind the scenes and basically gets them to the point where they just need to either click install or type in their password. So that's 3 places I have to manually update my list of what's available, what the latest updates are.
You have a fascinating ability to go down each and every rabbit hole that a user could possibly go down, which is great, by the way. That's actually a compliment, because I think about it and I'm like, I probably would have been like, hey, does nudge work? Is it working with the default settings? Is it prompting the user? Good, I'm done. And just move on. But you're thinking about those things because you're also reducing probably the amount of tickets that'll come in when it doesn't work. That's the smart way to go. I think I can be lazy at times, but I think that's fascinating. And that just goes to show you how broken software update is, just how bad it is.
Yeah, it's so kludgy, all these patches that we're doing.
I just want to take the bury my head in the sand approach and just hope things get better sometime soon.
Yeah, just you'll end up with another black screen with a white cursor in a couple days.
Nudge, kudos to Joe. However, that has posed to be a solution for most people. It doesn't sound easy. So my question is, based on the most recent rumblings, things are going to get better, right? Apple has backed away.
Guaranteed. Guaranteed to get better for sure. Yeah. Can't get worse, actually. So maybe.
Yeah. How much worse could it get? Isn't Apple supposed to fix some of this?
Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to, Jerry.
Yeah. That sounded very heartful too. It's like usually sometimes we're joking around with each other and everything like that, but it sounded very sincere coming from Jerry. It's going to get better,
guys. Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing is, though, like that update that Jerry's talking about, that's potentially an Apple issue. It's not something that he pushed out, and Nudge is trying to push through the Apple mechanism. And then I went a different route with some of my customers, not just for updates, but for upgrades, like where we needed to almost force the hand to get to Ventura in some organizations. And I've been using a custom workflow, which works great when it works. But all I'm saying is, in my situation, this was something that was not Apple default. So it was developed, which means when they run into trouble, now it is our fault. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that's a little tricky too. So we ran into a situation where the computers actually went through with the update and it completed to Ventura, but the computer reported back, because we were using a script to report this information back, it was still reporting back that it had the old version on it. So then the user would get a prompt again that said, hey, you need to upgrade. And they went through this loop before they reached out to us. It worked 85% of the time, and then 15% of the time it would not work. So we had to fix that. But the way I found out was a Saturday afternoon, I saw a message from this user saying, hey, my update, I finished, but it's happening again. And this is the third time it happened. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Let me fix it. And I fix it. And then I see a second email and then a third email. And I'm like, oh, crap. That's when you know something bad is starting to happen. And I had to go in, and luckily there was a way I could fix this en masse. But just the difference being when it's Apple's problem versus a problem that, that we potentially created ourselves. And now it's really on us to fix it.
For sure. And especially when they work with Apple, and they might hear from Apple, what is this kludgy thing that's coming up here that says nothing? This is not an Apple thing. They've got the Apple logo on there, but it's not Apple. Could just make the client feel like, what are these guys doing over here? It's just totally non-standard. Meanwhile, we're working around Apple stuff. So then is it us versus Apple again? And we have to walk that line where you don't want to quite throw Apple under the bus. I've been telling people we've had to work around some bugs in Apple's software update process, which if any other consultancy reported that to one of my clients, I'd be very suspicious of that. I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, Apple's software update doesn't work, but some independent consultancy is going to fix it. Okay, that's exactly what's happening. And you're right that we then therefore have to own it because Apple's not going to troubleshoot that whole process either. It's a mess. But yeah, thanks for acknowledging that, Sam, because that is the way I look at things. Is I try to avoid the old developer trope of it works on my system, it works in testing, it works in like the most straightforward out of the box scenario, but like in the real world, for whatever reason, you have all these other, again, like why does software update crap out and stop showing the right updates or not detecting the right updates? I've seen it on my own machine where I have to restart, MDM stops communicating, or software update breaks, and it just seems like a restart fixes it. Sometimes you can kickstart MDM. There's some great remediations that Adigy's built to work around the known issues, but even that is just built on top of a system that's supposed to work out of the box. It doesn't. It's a moving target. And I think for a couple versions, Jerry, I did the bury my head in the sand thing, Big Sur and Monterey. I'm not going to go through all these headaches to try to fix this stuff. Surely Apple will resolve this and then it'll just be fixed and I won't have to worry about it. But I kicked that can down the road a couple of OS versions and eventually just found I really needed nudge. And I got it working somewhere toward the end of the Monterey cycle when we were starting to go into Ventura. And so it was all in place, and I'm glad I did it because it's still needed even in Ventura. Yeah.
Not to mention, Max, that you have in a Monterey policy and you get the notification that they upgraded to Ventura just out of the blue.
Oh, yeah.
That's still happening to me from time to time.
Yeah, I think if they're running, this is another one of those situations where there was a definitive version. It was like if they were running something like 12.4 something to 12.6 something, they detected Ventura as an update. So there was nothing that could block it because it would just get deployed as part of software update, the standard software update mechanism. And then Apple's, we fixed that, and that was like in 12.6.2. But it turns out, then I'm still reading reports of people who are, I'm like 99.9% sure that this machine was running 12.6.2 or whatever it was, but it still had this problem, or 12.6.3, where it ended up upgrading to Ventura unexpectedly. So now we've gone from blocking it as a feature to deploying it as a feature to just throwing our hands up and being version roulette. Which macOS version do you want? Just restart and see what happens. Yeah.
There's an old Charlie Parker tune called Crapple from the Apple. And that could be our alternate show title.
Sounds prescient. Yeah. Oh, man.
How did he know?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
For all you music lovers, it's Scrapple from the Apple. I do know the real title, but
I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't either.
It comes down to customer perception of how you're doing your job versus are things you can't control, what might be coming on the Apple side. I was thinking about this the other day, and I want to get your take on this. When we've taken over new clients, let's say another consultancy, they have a setup with Wi-Fi that hasn't been managed or something like that. It oftentimes happens where, let's say we put in new equipment, all Unify, and we got this, looking great with the portal and everything seems to be working. We try and do our best heat map. And then within the first couple of days, people are starting to complain that things aren't as fast as they should be, or we got dead spots or this or that. And I've been in situations where I've done this, and then I'm going back to the customer and we're trying to figure out, we're not seeing these same things. What's the problem here? Can you repeat it for us? Those types of things. And then I've seen that like over a short couple of weeks, either these issues mysteriously disappear or people were just complaining because something changed. They knew something changed, and in the back of their minds and their subconscious, something's different. Something might not be right because a web page got a little slow for at one moment. And we didn't make any changes, but over the period of, let's say, the first few weeks of us working with them, all of a sudden, the tickets disappeared. And I checked in. I'm like, how are things going? I was almost afraid to check in. But I'm like, how are things going? They're like, oh, everything's great. Thanks. Whatever you guys did, fixed it. And I'm like, we didn't do anything. But do you know what I mean? It's like perception. What's in their heads of what's different?
Sure. Yeah. It even occurred to me today. I was working with a client on a migration to a new Mac, and she said her husband's Mac, he had some issues too. And he said, ever since we had some issues with the Wi-Fi on that side of the house that you guys fixed, or I don't know if it was something with an update, she was speculating. And she said his Mac is just really slow. It's a current MacBook Air. It works fine. It was pretty well up to date. It's something about the updates, and I thought maybe it's this nudge issue we were just talking about. So I remoted in. I'm thinking I'm going to find that problem where he's clicking through to update and it's not working for some reason or whatever. And I connected, and sure enough, the nudge window's on screen. It's the current version. In other words, it was the one I just deployed. It's saying you need 13.3.1 and you've got 13.3 or something in his case. And I clicked update on the nudge window and it just worked. It actually did work. Okay, it's working fine. So I did the update. She was saying his mail was slow and this and that. So I opened mail and I tested sending and receiving. It's downloading, 400 messages or something, and it's all working pretty smoothly. It was all fine. So I'm wondering if she just asked him, how's your Mac working? And he just came up with something that he vaguely recalled being a problem. Who knows what the issue was? Maybe it was just slow because the Wi-Fi on that side of the house, I forget what the issue is. I think we had to restart some access points or something. And so it was fine. But it was like by the time I looked at it, everything was pretty much fine. I just wonder if some of these cases are like because there's a prompt. Like, in other words, it's a prompt from you. You've been there to deal with the Wi-Fi, or you've been there to take over the account or whatever it is. And they feel like they kind of have to ask something or mention something,
Yeah.
This almost reminds me, it's not quite the same, but there's very few things I remember from school. But one of them was the Hawthorne Effect. And it took place, one of the Western Electric labs in Illinois. This happened back in the 1920s. And one of the labs was called Hawthorne. And so they took a group of, I think, assembly line workers, and they changed the lighting, and they made the lighting brighter, and productivity went up along the assembly line. And then as they were continuing the study, they actually lowered the lighting effect from where it was when they first started, and productivity shot up again. And the reason for this is that they say that participants, once they know they're being observed or singled out for special treatment, they end up increasing output if they think they're being watched. So I realize this isn't quite the same thing, but like Sam says, there's a perception that something changed, and they're looking for problems which may have always been there or never even existed.
Yeah. That reminds me of the issue where it just went out of my head. What does it remind me of? Crap. Outtake. Oh, man. That just happened to me. Yeah. Shoot.
So Hawthorne, here, let me turn up the lights, Joe, and maybe...
Yeah. That reminds me. Thank you. That worked, Jerry. Yeah. So the issue is when you do these, what do we call it now? Good guy phishing training for your clients. It's like they know that you're running a test. There is an experiment that's going on, or they don't know, but then maybe after the initial test, then they know. And so then they're more aware of it. So they're going to, because they know you're observing it, because they know somebody's watching to see, did they fall prey to this test or whatever, they're going to be more vigilant about it. And because they know they're being watched. Maybe there's something to that. You just make an innocuous change, and then they see that something has changed and they just think it's better, or
even if you just say something has changed. That's the piece. And I think, Jerry, Hawthorne Effect makes sense what you're saying. It's the whole object of knowing that something has been adjusted, or knowing that someone is observing the environment, and that just changes your way of thinking. It makes total sense there. And I've seen it more than once where I had to mention it on the show, where it's just over time, these things that seem like major issues or fires or concerns just slowly disappear and no one mentions them again. It's very odd to me, but it's that whole piece of just when something gets adjusted, or when they think something gets adjusted, their mind immediately goes to, that must equal some other effect of a change.
Yeah. And what's also really laughable sometimes in these large organizations, in this group mentality, we got a call where the Wi-Fi in one of the buildings for this educational institution that I support, the Wi-Fi degraded. And sure enough, we found that one of the antennas that we shoot across the football field, and we use Ubiquity products to do that, it had shifted in a windstorm. So they were getting less Wi-Fi juice being collected from the antenna, and then it was distributed to the building. So it had changed to the negative. But some of the anecdotal comments that come back are just laughable. People were saying, yeah, it's been like that all year. It's like, wait a minute. Like, how could you possibly have conducted teachers? How could you have presented what you do? How could the students have worked online with Google Docs? It couldn't have possibly been like this all year. And it's like this group mentality, and then they all pile on. And all of a sudden it gets worse, and you hear this horror story, and you're like, why is this the first time I've heard about this?
Yeah.
That's so annoying. I can't even. The fact that someone says something like that really gets under my collar, man. Because it's BS for one thing, but the fact that it's like throwing you under the bus for something that has been poor performing for the entire year. It's screw you.
Exactly.
It's a reflection on your performance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this has gone on all year and you've done nothing about it. You want to throttle somebody.
Yeah.
Who's saying that?
I got two quick stories, maybe not quick. But
do you have air quotes, I have a whole story about this?
I do. I have a whole story about this. So I sent you guys a screenshot of Microsoft Exchange Server, and it says Microsoft Outlook web app, which I think tells you a little bit about how outdated this is. And then at the bottom, connected to Microsoft Exchange, copyright 2010 Microsoft Corporation, all rights reserved. 2010, we're recording here in 2023. So that's 13 years ago that this version of this Microsoft Exchange Server was copyrighted. So for years, literally years now, we've been recommending that this client upgrade to Microsoft 365. We've upgraded a lot of clients to it over the years, and we have a pretty good process for that. Now, this is like maybe 20 people in this client. It would be a significant amount of work because just touching each workstation, configuring mobile devices, things like that, just the hand-holding part of it. And so we've recommended that just in general multiple times throughout the years because we knew they were using this, whoever this third-party host is that we have no one else using, that they've been using since before we started working with them, like 20 years ago.
Rackspace?
No, but it reminds me of the Rackspace issue. So we're helping a new user get set up recently, and I guess they needed webmail like from their home computer, so we got them into the webmail, and I noticed this copyright 2010. So that was like a big red flag for me. So I followed up on our previous recommendation and said, we've been recommending this. We really think you should upgrade. This mail server is really very insecure and like probably old and unreliable. So I just don't think this is really good to stay on this, testing fate here. And they demurred again. And so then the Rackspace debacle happened. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about with this client. The same kind of apocalypse is going to happen to this client because I think the Rackspace issue was due to outdated server infrastructure that got exploited due to a known zero day that had been patched months prior that Rackspace never patched, I think was the speculation or the understanding on that. And I thought the same thing could happen to this client's email server. So I reached out yet again and I said, we've previously recommended this. We noticed that your server seems to be pretty out of date. This recently affected a major provider called Rackspace. I don't know if you read about this in the news, but they had a major issue, blah, blah, blah. And I reiterated the recommendation again, and they deferred again and just weren't interested. So a week later, their mail server was down. I'm like, oh man, I hope they don't think I did something because it's like the timing was like too perfect. So I said, I know I just mentioned this to you guys, but I'm going to just take this opportunity yet again to say, this is what I'm afraid of, that your server right now, I don't know why it's down. You're getting in touch with your provider. Hopefully they have some kind of explanation. I hope it's not the same thing that affected Rackspace where you might lose access to all of your historical emails. You might have to now go through this process under duress. I really think you should migrate to a modern provider. And they said, oh, okay, we heard back from the provider. They said they had a router blow. They had a router blow. Now I'm imagining a Linksys in the guy's house or something. Just like, what do you mean you had a router blow? What
does that even mean? It's a Nighthawk or something.
Yeah, maybe it's all right. Can you send us a proposal? Finally, okay, they're engaging on this even in a minimal degree. They want a whole proposal now to actually think about upgrading. So we worked that up, wrote it up, and sent it over. And they said, we're going to give our provider a few days to come back or something. So they were down for a day and a half, no email. The provider got it fixed, got it back up and running. They put the hamster back on the wheel, fired up the server again, whatever they had to do. And it's working. And the client is, phew, problem solved. And we're like, no, but okay. So then another couple weeks later, I'm copied on an email chain about how the client wants to integrate HubSpot. So HubSpot it's like a CRM kind of thing, and they want to integrate it with their email. I don't know about Microsoft Exchange from 2010, if there's going to be a connector for HubSpot here. So I do some research, and it says, basically I find that HubSpot has an integration with Microsoft 365 that's Mac compatible because it's like a server-side thing, but it requires Microsoft 365 hosted email, not this third-party thing. So I, circled back yet again on our recommendation to migrate to Microsoft 365 because this would also achieve this goal. Like, how many reasons do you need here to move forward with this thing? You're using this independent email hosting provider that doesn't integrate. So then I'm copied on the chain with the hosting provider. The guy responds to the client, and I don't know the backstory, but his email to the client, did you understand what HubSpot integration person was saying? I don't understand the wording here. Doesn't matter rather you are Exchange, Gmail, or Outlook. I guess he's saying whether you are Exchange, Gmail, or Outlook. The HubSpot integration won't be able to control anything except appointment invitation. And he went on to say something about how they're interested in the calendar integration, but he's getting off in the weeds on basically some hand waving to say that wouldn't solve your need, wanting to keep the business, basically. So in response to my email saying HubSpot has this Microsoft 365 integration that's Mac compatible, he quotes that and he responds and says, "This is true. Not sure how much experience with this you have had. However, in my experience, it has many asterisks attached to it as far as the desktop client integration. The webmail integration works great, regardless of platform." So he's just hemming and hawing about how this wouldn't really address their issue, blah, blah, blah. So I let it be. And then I follow up with the client a week later and, oh, we're still researching and working on it. Thanks for following up, pushing me off with this recommendation. So I let it go for another few weeks. And then I followed up one more time and I just said, "Are you going to do this or not?" kind of thing. And the client wrote back, "Thanks," and this is the owner of the business, "Thanks for reaching out. We're going to stay with the server we have now with all of its flaws. They will be upgrading their servers over the summer." So, sounds great. So I replied
Forrest Gump, stupid is as stupid does.
Exactly. I got to put something on record here because I've already basically made this point 15 times, but I wanted to share my wording again like I sometimes do. So I said, "Hi, client. Thanks for your response. Noted and understood. Just putting on record that a migration under duress without notice would be even more costly and may result in unavoidable downtime. So, of course, we hope it doesn't come to that." And then I just said if they upgrade the server software and improve their network infrastructure, that would make us more confident in the current provider. It's fine if they're running a modern version of Exchange, even on a third-party host. I guess that's tenable. But I just thought I had to just mention that we just keep putting this off. But if we wait until the server is down and we can't migrate from the source in that situation, or you call us and say, "Okay, we're ready to go and we have to do it today," we're going to have to charge a lot more and you might have downtime and it's really not going to be fun for anybody. Yeah, that was a lot of follow-up on a very needed, very worthwhile project that the client just completely declined to move forward with.
And all your due diligence and concern and replies and responses, that just goes probably slightly unappreciated, if not fully unappreciated, and you don't get paid for it.
Right. And again, this is that classic thing where the upside is high enough where it's worth some follow-up. It's worth keeping the ticket open, setting it to pending for a month from now or whatever it is, waiting till their busier season, waiting until another month goes by and maybe they have some more revenue. But if they don't do it when the server's down and they don't do it when the integration would achieve their goal, none of these reasons are good enough for them. They just clearly are not a buyer. I forget what the quote was, but it was tens of hours of billable time. They have a lot of data. That's actually the other issue, is that I think their provider is giving them a lot of storage that Microsoft doesn't provide. Like some of the mailboxes are probably, I know, are over 50 gigs.
Wow.
So it would be a lot of data, a lot of oversight to just manage it, and the number of workstations to touch, not to mention the mobile devices. And I think you guys have shared with me, I don't know if we've ever shared this on the show, but do you want to talk about how we quote something like that, migrating an email server for a client?
It's interesting that you asked that because we've had some internal concerns about this and how to price this out. And we generally do this based on the amount of users and estimate how much time that would take for the migration. And then if there's on-site needed, if it's a half a day or something like that, or hand-holding for client setups, we usually do a guide where we bill a couple of hours and then some on-site or remote time. But the reason why I say it's interesting that you asked that is because I think we're pretty spot on. We've gotten pretty good at that just by estimating not even the size of mailboxes, because that's pretty automated. It just runs as you use your migration service, but just figuring out how much manpower is needed depending on the size of the organization. We do that based on number of hours. But going back to it, I know another consultancy, and we actually love working with them, but we have a very different model because they actually bill essentially an hour per user. And we had a 40 user migration, and I'm like, I can't charge 40 hours just for the migration part. And then there's the after effects of helping them out and doing all that other stuff. And it just seems like 5 days of labor for basically entering accounts into a migration whiz or Google migration and hitting a button is high. It's just really high. Because you can do things simultaneously, that an hour per user is really accurate. So I'm curious that you brought this up, Joe, because I actually have very strong feelings about doing that. But how do you guys do it?
The way I presented this particular project was we said 5 hours flat for the initial setup, which would cover the discovery and configuring the migration tasks. Because again, I think it was around 15 to 20 users, but some of it was unclear because we didn't have admin access to the old server. So we didn't even have like a full list of all the user accounts. We were asking some of the point people, is there an info address? Oh yeah, there's an info address on the website. It forwards to me. Okay, good to know. Is there like any other kind of contact page thing or any other, is there a scanner account or whatever, things like that. And so there's some discovery that was still to be done even after we knew there'd be some mystery to this. So we wanted like a upfront kind of like initial setup cost. And then we did end up saying 1 hour per user because it would cover overseeing and troubleshooting the migration tasks. Sometimes you have password wasn't right, actually. There's all these adjustments now that are needed for getting Migration Wiz to work with Microsoft 365, turning off security defaults and things like that, turning off MFA and everything for the migration. Sometimes that stuff isn't as straightforward as you would hope. So there's sometimes some tweaking there.
Sure. Does that include after migration support, the hour per user, or is that a totally separate piece?
So we figured that would also include configuring Outlook on the Mac and then providing instructions and some guidance for the mobile devices as well.
Okay. All right. That's fair then. This was just doing the migration, and then there would be a charge for any after effects support.
I think you're right. On a 40-person client, I don't know that I'd hold with the 1 hour per user. I don't think the client would really ever agree to that because there is some economy of scale. There's definitely going to be some users that are, give me the link, I'm good to go thing. And there's other users that do require a little bit more hand-holding. But again, like overseeing the migration, for 40 users, I'd probably use a spreadsheet to get the tasks set up for the migration. There would be some more economy of scale with that. So I'd probably maybe not cap it, but maybe, I don't know how I would exactly price it with 40 users, but it probably wouldn't just hold at 1 hour per.
As the company size grows, like you're saying, you can't hold it to that. Maybe if we're talking 8 users, then okay, that's a day. But as you grow or in the size of the customer, you can't just stick to that. That's where I was going with that. Maybe an hour is fine on a smaller business, but there's just no way you can stick to that number as it grows. It's just impossible for it to be feasible in terms of cost for the customer. So that's where we started to come up with other methods of billing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, curious if listeners, of course, have any feedback about that. Maybe head over to the Command Control Power channel in the Mac Admins Slack, and we can talk it over. But it's the kind of thing, too, like once they do it, I never expect them to have to leave Microsoft 365. It's probably going to be the lifetime email provider for this client.
The last house you'll buy.
That's right. It's your forever email provider. Yeah. Special thanks to the following community members whose strong monthly support has sustained us for all these years. Ryan Gowdy, CoreCompetent.com. Weldon Dodd, Kanji.io. Richard Wingfield, EnvisionDesign.net. Adam Rice, AskAdam.io. Mac Admins Podcast, podcast.macadmins.org. Tim Nyberg, TheMacGuys.com. Michael Thompson, Origin84.com. Matthew Waples, Waples.net. Tom Puls, BoxIT.tech. Jerome Potters, PITPro.nl. Steve Sorbo, MacSOS.biz. Andy Espo, CallAndy.com. And Nate Sinal, WeAreAScout.com. Thank you all very much, and thanks to our patrons at every level of support. If you enjoy the show, we really would love your support. And if you already support us and can increase your monthly pledge, we really do find that encouraging. CommandControlPower.com and click support. Thanks very much for listening and for supporting the show.
Of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns all the time.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where